Hey everybody, we're here with Max Brown, who is here to talk to us about approving referendum 88/I-1000. He's with Washington Fairness. Max, would you like to take 5 minutes to talk about referendum 88?
Sure, of course. And I'll note that our campaign manager, Sharika Carter, couldn't be here today, so I'm pinch hitting a little bit for her. So she sends along her regards as well. But I'm the one of the general consultants for the Washington Fairness campaign to approve Initiative 1000, Referendum 88, which will appear on your November ballot this year. I-1000 is in place to undo the serious legacy of harm caused by Tim Eyman's passage of Initiative 200 that passed in 1998 by a vote of the people. We know that since, and that initiative made explicit the banning the use of affirmative action in Washington State with regards to public contracting opportunities, public employment, and university admissions for communities of color. We know that since that time, according to the Washington Office of Women and Minority Business Enterprises, state spending with certified minority and women-owned businesses has dropped from 10% to 3%, resulting in a $3.8 billion economic loss to those businesses. And we know that since I-200 passed, diversity in Washington's public universities, four-year public universities, has not kept up with the growing and more diverse population of our state. In particular, the number of Black, Native American, Pacific Islander students enrolled in all four-year public universities has decreased. And in other instances, as other populations have grown as a percent of the total state population, the number of individuals from those communities hasn't kept up as a proportion to the state population overall. So I-1000 was, we did a different campaign, gathered 400,000 signatures and submitted that to the legislature for the 2019 session for approval, which the legislature did and the governor passed into law. Tim Eyman and his activists then received enough signatures to put that to a ballot referendum, which is why we are here today, where we are. So I'm here to advocate on behalf of the Washington Fairness campaign for an approved vote for I-1000/Referendum 88 this year, and hope to secure your endorsement in that pursuit. I think our campaign is a coalition, statewide coalition built from labor, from the business community, communities of color. We have a wide-ranging and diverse steering committee, including April Sims, the State Labor Council. Former Governor Locke is one of our co-chairs as well. Our steering committee members include ACLU of Washington, Urban League of Seattle, Microsoft, the Black Collective, and many others. And I think the top line here really is about opportunity in Washington State and how we, as a state, sort of take the opportunity to act collectively to rectify serious imbalance and access to those public dollars for communities that could use them. By passing I-1000, we'll ensure that the state can, in fact, reach out to communities that they want more represented in universities and the public contracting and public employment, and work to recruit and train and bring people into those roles, which they're not allowed to do in this moment. This initiative would not institute the use of caps or quotas in this endeavor. So it's something that the opposition has been messaging on, is caps and quotas, and that's factually not true. Actually, they lost a challenge to a court judge on this issue just recently to change the ballot language. So I just want to make sure that's clear. That's been kind of one of the primary oppositional arguments that we've heard. So I would ask for your support in this and in I-1000, Referendum 88. I think that we can make Washington a place where more people can share in the prosperity that we've been blessed to be a part of here in in this region and across the state, and happy to take questions about the initiative.
Great, thank you. And with that, we'll open it up to questions, starting with Lori.
You say it does not use quotas and caps. What is the mechanism that it uses?
Correct. So this, gets to a little bit of technicality in how the initiative is written. The initiative defines affirmative action as providing equal opportunity through recruitment, hiring goals, outreach, and training. This is separate from preferential treatment, which would be defined as selecting someone solely on the basis of characteristics such as race or gender.
Thank you.
Liz and then Matt.
So your opposition actually put forth a couple of other ideas. One of them was that there would be a panel to review who would and would not get a contract, which sounded almost death panel-y to me.
Yeah.
So I was hoping that you could speak to the actualities of the panel and how it would do reviews. And that there was one more statement put forth, that perhaps women and minorities have become that much less competitive since I-200 was passed, and that we are not following the correct processes, and we're just not able to do that properly, and that's why women and minority-owned businesses are not being selected.
I'll let them make that argument.
Yes, I was hoping you might care to rebut either of those.
Sure. I mean, I would, let's start on the second point, just because I can feel the hair standing up on the back of my neck as you're describing that. I mean, I think, at least in my view, and this is shared by our steering committee and constituent members of the campaign, obviously there's a long historical trajectory for communities of color in Washington State that has contributed to, systemic inability to access the same opportunities that white people are able to access. And so, in my mind, this is a chance to give folks who are working at state agencies a tool to be part of the solution, and to make sure that just because of the zip code you're born in or the color of your skin doesn't determine on a generational scale your capacity to access economic opportunities. In terms of the panel, you said they said there was going to be a panel that was going to decide who's in and who's out. That's not how this would work.
It turned out that was the case of the death penalty.
Yeah. Right. In reality, what are we talking about here? We're talking about a state agency looking at the composition of their agency and saying, we want a more diverse workforce, and we're going to implement a program that institutes some outreach to specific communities to help us get there, or we're going to provide more training opportunities, and we'll invite people into that space. That's what we're talking about, right? I think the opposition is sort of overthinking this on purpose, really. It's just really about whether or not we can proactively use public resources to help rectify, that history of economic imbalance and inequity in Washington State. And I would argue that, yes, we should do that, and we can with the passage of I-1000.
Great, Matt.
So you talked about recruiting and hiring goals. Creating the goals is one thing, but is there going to be any look at the barriers towards applying to work at a state agency or owning a business that disproportionately impact people of color? Will this help remove some of those barriers in the process?
I'm sure in the process of constructing these outreach programs, inherently there will be an examination of the existing structures that prevent all people from having that equal access, and some capacity or intent to remove those barriers in the process of doing that outreach or providing those opportunities.
Great.
Yes.
Jamie, then Summer, and Sarah.
So I was working for the grad school on admissions issues at the time that I-200 went into effect. And my
understanding at the time of how it was interpreted is that it essentially made so the university could not consider an applicant making the student population more closely resemble the state population one of many factors. And so it had to be eliminated, while other factors such as perhaps the number of AP classes were offered in the school, etc., that tended to automatically favor white students remained in place. And it resulted in admissions classes where in some classes there were, for example, no African Americans admitted to University of Washington Law School in some years, and in other years there was as little as 2. So my understanding of what this referendum would do is it would just allow, in terms of higher education, it would just allow universities to once again consider the fact that an applicant would make the population more reflective of the state as one of many factors to balance out some of the factors that are already part of the admissions policy that are structurally disadvantaging marginalized communities. Is that correct in how it would work in terms of admission?
Correct, yes, but the decision wouldn't be made on the basis of that characteristic alone.
Right.
Yes,
It never was.
correct.
Summer?
And I practice labor and employment law for a large government agency. So my question is, one thing that I've seen, first of all, we talked last night with your opponent about the fact that state jobs come with a lot of benefits, a lot of, it comes with a property right to your job, and how beneficial a state job is, especially in today's world where so often employers are trying to go to independent contractors rather than employees and not give benefits. So we talked about that. The other thing that I would like to make sure is that I see a lot of really wanting to hire somebody from like a top 5 law school, and I'm a lawyer, a top 5 law school for, say working at a federal agency, where quite honestly, being a hard worker and getting along with people and obviously having a JD and going to law school and doing well matters, but that prestige is something that often leads to the hiring of white people when it's not necessary. Where somebody who put themselves through school or got a scholarship at a lesser known law school would do a fabulous job. And so I'm hoping that even though there's not some sort of preferential treatment, that there would be a looking at less about the prestige, which often goes to upper middle class white individuals with a lot of privilege who can afford to go through all of these schools and these tracks and take unpaid internships, etc. throughout the years. And so would this help those kinds of applicants who are trying to get jobs that have obviously the great skill set, but maybe not that prestige factor that so often government agencies look for?
I believe it would, yes.
Okay, great. Sarah?
My question was just along the same lines as Jamie's in terms of how this would actually apply to public higher education institutions. And my understanding was similar to hers, but you're talking as well about outreach programs, which are critically important, because I was with the University of Washington School of Law and we had to get to students. So how would that work in practice? Because I think that's critically important.
I think that's a good question. I think probably every agency is a little bit different in terms of how they perceive the deficits in the pool of applicants that they're seeing on an annual basis, and I think it would just allow them to actually make decisions about their program resource commitments that seek to ameliorate those deficits, whatever they perceive them to be. I can't say that I have an answer for you specifically about each agency, what their process would be to as they move forward, but this would at least let them even ask that question and then dedicate resources to fulfilling the answer to that question. So I'm happy to get more information for you. I just can't say that I have that right off the top for the various agencies. Yeah. Yes.
So one of the ways that the opposition was messaging pretty heavily during the signature collection phase was on veterans' rights. So I was hoping you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So there wouldn't be, this wouldn't supersede any federal requirements for, veterans treatment. The state law wouldn't, as a course of, where they are in the hierarchy, that wouldn't be something that happens. The state also will have the opportunity to, one of the provisions in the measure is the legislature is directed to, in the first 3 months of the new legislative session, to go back and make sure that everything that's contained in the initiative is consistent with existing state law. So, and the intent of the initiative, I think, is obvious, right? There wouldn't be anything in here that would make it so that veterans have fewer opportunities. And the legislature is directed to ensure that, in the first 3 months, they go through sort of a fine-tooth comb and make whatever technical fixes need to happen to ensure that's the case.
Where does that come from though? Like that messaging? Because I was very confused that was like such a huge part of their spend.
Yeah, right. I think, there are some federal programs that do have some, requirements or quotas. I think they, want to use that as a point of confusion for this campaign. I think generally, obviously, and for good reason, veterans are important to Washington State, comprise a large part of our population by a factor of how many military bases we have in Washington State, and so I think they're trying to leverage that fact to confuse the issue, and I think we should not let them do that. If you'd like, I do have more in-depth sort of legal background documents that explain in particularly the veterans issue. I can provide those. I'm not a lawyer, but I understand from people who are much smarter than me that we are good on that front. I've summarized their arguments as best I can in this setting, but would be more than happy to provide more information on that account.
Thank you. Liz, did you still have a question?
I was just wondering if you were anticipating this particular level of backlash and opposition, and how you're proceeding.
Yes, this level of backlash and opposition. I will say, having been down to the legislature myself to lobby for the passage of I-1000 and seeing the thousands of people turn out in like uniform shirts, and I would also say sort of frankly appropriating like progressive language in their counter arguments about equality, and quoting MLK, and like doing just, the range of things. That was very surprising, or at least I've never experienced quite something like that. But when it gets down to it, you'll find that the arguments that the opposition puts forward are largely based on misinformation. They will, try to pull a thread on issues that don't really exist, like the veterans issue, and we're hoping that folks aren't paying quite enough attention to really understand what this initiative does. But at the end of the day, Washington State right now is one of 8 states that has an explicit ban on affirmative action of any kind. So, you look at that list of states, right? And it's like, so I guess what I'm trying to say is that there are 42 states in the union that understand how, historic economic trajectories have impacted whole communities and empower their public institutions to take tangible actions to rectify those imbalances. And I would just say that we should do that to, to me, it's as straightforward as that.
Thanks. Would you like to give a 30-second wrap up?
Oh, sure. We've talked about we've talked through a lot of really important issues, and this is a very sophisticated interview panel, which I really appreciate. I think, with any of these issues or the candidates that we elect, it's good to know that our diligence is being done in this endorsement process. I would just finish by maybe reiterating again that as a Washingtonian and a Democrat and a progressive, I know where my values are when it comes to these kinds of issues. We all understand the historical context in which we're operating, and this is a very tangible thing that we can do together to try to create more fairness and equity in the system. $3.8 billion over 20 years. I mean, that's a lot of money, right? And we're talking about, from 10% to 3%, you know what I mean? So there's measurable impacts that have occurred to vulnerable communities in Washington State as a result of the outcome of I-200. And we have an opportunity here together to try to right some of that historical imbalance. It's not going to be everything all at once. It's not going to, happen overnight, but at least, we should try to put ourselves on the right trajectory.
Thank you very much.